I'm going to do a couple show and tells. This is oil from the BP oil spill from the Macondo well. Can anyone say, can you see from there what it looks like in this bag? Say it louder. Yeah, it's exactly what it looks like. Seriously, this is from a beach in Mobile, Alabama. But you have to imagine that the oil is all along the coast, right? It's in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, where am I forgetting? Texas, Florida, Texas. I didn't say Louisiana? Louisiana. Okay. And it washes up in all kinds of different ways, right? It washes up in the ocean as oil mixed with dispersant, so it looks like these long streaks that you see. Sometimes it flows in clumps. It's on the beach sometimes as a heavy sheen of oil, just a thick layer of oil. Sometimes it's these balls, these tar balls of oil in clumps. And it's all over and it's everywhere. And when I first walked on the beach and the first time I was on an oiled beach in Alabama, I thought I was looking at bark. You know when bark comes in after a wave and there's all this wood everywhere? And I was walking along and I thought I saw the bark, and as I looked closer and bent down, I touched it, and it's oil, and it's thick, and you have to break it, and it leaves a brown stain on your hand, and it looks like shit. And it's BP and the oil industry literally shitting on the beaches with each wave that comes in. The wave comes in, people come in and clean it up. The next wave comes in, the oil comes back in, shits on the beach, people come in and clean it up, and over and over and over and over. And when I talked to many BP workers, they said, I'm going to be doing this until 2014. And that's a conservative estimate for how long they're going to be going on these beaches. So I just got back from my second trip down. I'm leaving again tomorrow to go back to the Gulf. I've had the incredible privilege of working with a network of groups that I met and have been organizing with through the Chevron Program, now working with on BP. And one message I hope to leave you with tonight is this is not about BP. This is about the oil industry. This was an event that was bound to happen, expected to happen, predicted to happen, and happened. All of the oil companies that operate in the Gulf, let me show you this. This is the cover of our alternative annual report for Chevron. And just by the way, these are expensive to print, which is why they're $10. They're free online, download them, print them. Or if print is what you need, please take one and you don't have $10. We're just trying to recoup the expenses. I'm the editor. This was written by communities all across the world, all across the country, impacted by Chevron. The cover image is an oil spill, a Chevron oil spill, in a national wildlife preserve off the coast of Louisiana that happened 2 weeks before the BP explosion. This is a Chevron oil pipeline that was severed and leaked a mere 84,000 gallons of oil into the ocean. It sounded like a lot at the time. This is happening more and more and more because the oil industry and its intense contribution to climate change and its operations in the Gulf accentuate and exaggerate and lead to coastal erosion. Coastal erosion is problematic for lots of reasons, but one of them is that it exposes more and more all the infrastructure of the oil industry. So oil pipelines, and the Gulf Coast isn't just oil rigs, marshes, wildlife, national wildlife preserves, and beaches. It is miles and miles and miles of oil infrastructure, canals, pipelines, arteries that carry the oil from the reservoirs in the ocean to the land. And those pipelines, those arteries are being ever more exposed, and they're being severed constantly. And that is what happened here. Chevron's the largest leaseholder in the Gulf. The cover of Chevron's annual report this year is their glistening new Transocean operated rig operating out in the Gulf in the same waters as the BP spill. It was BP that was operating, it was Transocean that was operating the Deepwater Horizon, BP's rig. Transocean operates the vast majority of rigs out in the Gulf. They also have one of the worst safety records of any company. And all of the oil companies use Transocean, and all of the oil companies used that same safety preparedness report that BP used for what would happen if they had an accident out in the Gulf. That report was the one that Rose cited that said things like what they would do if there was an oil spill in the Gulf to protect walruses and polar bears. What that means is that they cut and pasted it from their Arctic report, right? They also had scientific experts in there who would come in and deal with the oil spill. One of those experts died in 2005. This isn't funny. And he was cited in their 2009 preparedness report. There was also a link for the company, one of the companies that would come in and help with the cleanup. That link goes to an Asian supermarket. All of the companies operating in the Gulf use the identical plan. The reason why this happened is because the oil industry has moved further and further out, has become more and more desperate for oil, right? Their value as companies comes most importantly from the amount of oil reserves they have, what they can book as their own. There's less and less oil in the world. More of it is controlled by governments who you have to go to war to get it back from, and of course we're doing that. Most of it is also moving into more difficult to get to places where it's more expensive to get to it, more environmentally destructive, socially, human rights. Places like the tar sands in Alberta and deep offshore. Deep offshore drilling is a relatively new phenomena, and particularly deep offshore drilling in the Gulf. Rose showed you all of those, the operations and cited the thousands of rigs that are, or platforms that are in the Gulf of Mexico. Or just actually to make sure that we all know this, why this is all in the Gulf of Mexico. We have moratoriums. We had moratoriums. In 1969, there was a Unocal blowout off the coast of Santa Barbara. Chevron now owns Unocal. That blowout happened in Santa Barbara where there was an organized environmental movement. That movement took action right away, started organizing, had already said that offshore drilling wasn't safe, and suddenly their voice was very, very, very loud. More people listened, more people organized. That organizing led to the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, and ultimately a moratorium on offshore drilling off the coast of California, off the Atlantic, off the Pacific, and parts of Alaska. It was allowed to continue in the Gulf. The vast majority of Gulf production still takes place from shallow, the vast majority of operations still take place from shallow platforms. There's hundreds and thousands of them. Many of them have just been abandoned. They're leaking, they're dangerous, and they get left behind. But that's still the majority of the operations. But the vast majority of production now comes from the deep wells. So 1,000 is a deep well, 5,000 is ultra deep. This one was at 5,000 feet, but that's 5,000 from the ocean surface to the ocean floor. The reservoir total is 18,500 feet. BP has drilled the deepest offshore reservoir anywhere in the world, just out past the Macondo well, 35,000 feet down. That's as far down as Mount Everest is up. As they're pushing out into these horizons, they're finding big reservoirs. Now, Rose said that reservoir would only feed the US for 5 days. We consume an enormous amount of oil. That's an enormous reservoir. It's an enormous reservoir. Right now, what we have from that reservoir is a leak. I don't refer to it as a gusher. It's a leak. It's a leak from a pipe. If that pipe bursts, if there's a hole that pops up somewhere else, we will have a gusher. And that is an enormous reservoir. And that's why they went out there, and that's why they went out further. Now, they were allowed to go out there without proper oversight, without enforcement, because of the wedding of the oil industry to the government.